A chief characteristic of evil is the devaluing of human life down to simple economic or financial measures. Many notable case studies throughout history exhibit this, for example, the liquidation of the kulaks during Soviet-era Russia. However, all societies across the planet currently struggle with the same very problem through the forms of sexual slavery, trafficking, and exploitation. While it's easy to associate the practice with backwash woodland towns, dark alleys, or decrepit basements in metropolitan cities, human trafficking can also occur in the most unlikely of locations. Case in point, vacation spots. While Amsterdam is a famous tourist location for sex and other similar endeavors, a sinister disease lies within the red light district's alleys. The famed district for the city's tourists and clients alike has predictably been infiltrated by pimps and traffickers alike who exploit others for sole financial and monetary gain. As BBC reporter Anna Holligan writes in 2019, quote, "Some researchers say 4,000, others say 8,000. Some say 10% are trafficked, others say 90%. Even with the lowest figure, 400 girls are selling sex against their will and are raped every day." However, as the great Albert Einstein once said, quote, "If I had an hour to solve a problem, I'd spend 55 minutes thinking about the problem and 5 minutes thinking of solutions." To understand how to reach a viable solution for sex trafficking and sexual slavery within the red light district, we must learn about the dark underbelly of the problem. To illustrate and understand the deep relationship between sex trafficking and the red light district, the following areas will be discussed and elaborated upon. First, the technical aspects and academic definitions of sex trafficking and sexual slavery. Second, the methodology of the traffickers. Third, the problems contributing to the practice of the red light district. Fourth, the problems within prevention. And 5, an evaluation of the present results into the preventative measures undertaken within the Netherlands. First, it's important to note that this video is going to focus less on the remedies for the problems within the red light district and more on the disease itself. As Albert Einstein has said, understanding the problem is the first step to solving it. This video is meant to arm you with the facts so that you may gain a deeper understanding and formulate solutions for the posed problem. Through this, together, we can hopefully band together and eradicate the practice altogether within the Netherlands and our own communities. So for those unaware, the red light district, or De Wallen, is a location in Amsterdam, and as defined by researchers Hubbard and Walmel, 2008, it is a famous location for sex work. However, other sources of public information, such as travel websites, describe the district as, quote, "a neighborhood in central Amsterdam that is a designed area for prostitution and sexually explicit shows, stops, and museums." Heckman, 2024. The district essentially is a sliver of the city dedicated to sex work and other affiliated attractions. However, despite its niche subject matter, the district is quite popular, as the tourist location hosted in 2022 20 million tourists, according to Moses 2023. First, in a study conducted by Dutch researchers Maite Verhoeven, Barbara van Getstel, Deborah J. Jong, and Edward Klimas, the definition of human trafficking is as follows. Quote, "Human trafficking is the recruitment, transportation, transfer, harboring, or receipt of persons by means of the threat or use of force under forms of coercion, abduction, of fraud, deception, or the abuse of power, or the position of vulnerability, or the giving or receiving of payments or benefits to achieve the consent of a person to control another person for exploitation." 2015. Essentially, it is trafficking a person for sexual services and for the abductor or trafficker themselves to achieve money out of the transaction. It is necessary to provide context as to how vulnerable groups fall victim to pimps and traffickers in order to examine the problem of sex trafficking within the red light district through a critical lens and the contributing background features. Understanding how adverse life experiences contributed to victims falling prey to traffickers within the red light district is essential. First, vulnerability is just a weakness exploited by traffickers. To understand how vulnerability figures into sex trafficking within the red light district, it becomes necessary to understand how people end up in such situations. First, many victims have closer intimate relationships with traffickers and recruiters before being recruited within the Netherlands, thereby making it a crime of relational nature. Within the study, the researchers pointed out as boyfriend relationships, quote, Verhoeven, Getzel, Jong, and Klimas, 2015. Meaning, recruiters or pimps can be close acquaintances, friends, or, most often, romantic partners. Through these angles, traffickers can use various tricks to bring the targeted victim to the fray and ensure their subjugation. First, as evidenced by the cited Dutch researchers above, within the red light district, the threat of physical violence to intimidate or manipulate their intended victim is common, as it serves as an effective means of exerting power or control over their victim. 2015. In the case of the red light district, domestic violence is prominent within the relationship between victims and abusers, as, quote, domestic violence consists of 90% of other tactics, namely intimidation, isolation, or control. 2015. As a notable example is the Sneep case, as in Amsterdam, where German pimps used intimate relationships within family networks, in addition to brutal violence, as tools to manipulate international victims into sex work. Huseman and Klimas, 2014. The second method is emotional manipulation, as recruiters will establish, quote, boyfriend relationships in order to lure in the victim. As researchers have pointed out, the victim will be taken under false pretenses and images, such as lavish clothing adorned by the trafficker, exhibited superficial charm, or expensive gifts to the victim. Moreover, quote, almost all couples started living together. Sometimes they ran a shared household. Sometimes traffickers and victims lived with several women at the same time, unquote. Verhoeven, Getzel, Jong, and Klimas, 2015. In essence, recruiters would establish an ordinary relationship that demonstrated the typical characteristics of a loving relationship. Through this ordinary life, the abuser would begin to pimp the victim through emotional manipulation, such as the threat of terminating the relationship, cited researchers above, 2015. Furthermore, researchers compiled the demographics of victims within the district from police investigations. The investigation involved 76 victims, all women, and several suspects within the red light district. The ages of the victims varied from 18 to 58, and their nationality was predominantly Hungarian and Turkish, but half were Dutch. A third of the women were below 21 years of age, cited researchers above, 2015. After examining the outlined methodology of recruiters and traffickers within the Netherlands, a rational listener might ask, why don't these women just simply go to the police? While this seems like a seemingly sufficiently obvious question, the solving this problem within the red light district is not straightforward nor sufficient. The reason is threefold. 1, the abuser exercising physical control over the victim. 2, the environmental circumstances facing the victim. And 3, manipulation by the abuser. First, victims are often kept in service of the abuser through physical means. For example, domestic violence consists of 90% of control methods. Verhoeven, Getzel, Jong, and Klimas, 2015. Second, it is the victim's environment that also contributes. So to explain, the victim is usually surrounded by pimps, bodyguards, errand boys, drivers, brothels, and accountants. While these informal players play often minimal roles to facilitate sex work, while some do more, they simultaneously create a network of control around the sex workers and profit from the latter's earnings. Verhoeven and Getzel, 2016. Essentially, making the victim feel trapped. Third is manipulation imposed upon the victim by the abuser. As, quote, sex trafficking is often embedded in intimate relationships, by which intimidation, control, and violence play a role, along with affection and economic dependency. Quote, Verhoeven, Getzel, Jong, and Klimas, 2015. To provide a framework for this point, Victims of domestic violence and sex trafficking within the red light district have an underlying commonality. The victim's eventual trafficking is the result of an accumulation of acts, as the traffickers target people who have a desire for a sense of belonging, fancy things, or to simply have financial stability. Cited researchers, 2015. In essence, the abuser will locate a victim, establish connection, and prey upon their desires in order to lure them into a life of trafficking. All these factors combined make it much harder for the victim to leave, as at times they are economically dependent or fear losing or terminating the relationship. Since we have now established how recruiters will find, locate, and ensnare victims into a life of sex trafficking and sexual abuse, let us now look at the methods of prevention. One factor which has further complicated the issue of sex trafficking within the red light district is legalization of prostitution within the Netherlands. In the year 2000, Dutch authorities lifted the prohibition of prostitution in the region as a means to regulate the industry instead of maintaining preventative measures. The legalization not only allowed actors to receive permits for their profession. However, the measure only further complicated the combating of human trafficking and sex trafficking within the region, as the relationship between legalized prostitution and slavery is evident. Furthermore, the legal criminalization of pimping has also been lifted, as individuals can be processed for sex trafficking now. Huseman and Klimas, 2014. However, as the study stresses, many actors and businesses complied with the regulations, and the number of prostitutes operating without a legal license decreased substantially. Huseman and Klimas, 2014. While these are encouraging statistics, other factors have erupted that dispute the practice's legalization. For example, the same study found lower rates of emotional well-being, as the number of prostitutes working without a pimp also did not decrease. And many prostitutes did not file for taxes, thereby making many of their licenses illegitimate. Moreover, most of the victims, as evidenced from a similar study 1997 to 2000 of trafficking, utilized the windows of the red light district in the same manner as those that were suspected to be trafficked, thereby delineating whether or not some licenses were illegal, illegitimate, or some of the prostitutes were outright exploited. Huseman and Klimas, 2014. The way Dutch authorities have prosecuted cases has also been disappointing, as insufficient attention has been given to these cases via the expediency principle. The expediency principle is a hallmark of European law that gives public prosecutors the power to refrain from prosecuting cases via discretionary power. Huseman and Klimas, 2014. However, in a recent case, LK versus the Netherlands in 1991, the court narrowed the discretionary range slightly for cases involving discrimination. University of Minnesota, 1993. However, it was insufficient to encourage greater emphasis on prosecuting trafficking. This was one of the reasons for a decriminalization of prostitution and pimping within the Netherlands, as Dutch authorities consider it may prove more advantageous to exert license control over the sex industry through permits, instead of risking the case being thrown out via the wide range of applicability through the expediency principle. Such a shift may also be due to the state of the Dutch courts, as according to the data of the government of the Netherlands, court cases can now often be handled quickly, often resulting in the perpetrator escaping the country. To examine this point through an empirical lens, relevant data suggests that Dutch courts are facing increased rates of crime cases. For reference, Dutch authorities registered over 797,700 crimes in 2022, a significant increase in comparison to 2021. Statista 2024, source A. In 2022, there were 9,008 sex-related registered crimes within the nation, a decade-high comparison to the second highest rate of 8,227 over the same decade. Statista 2024, source B. In conclusion, while we have a greater understanding of the underlying factors that contribute to sex trafficking and their relationship to victim recruitment, there is still progress to be made. The results of the Dutch government are mixed, While there is evidence suggesting their efforts to policymakers to reduce sexual exploitation through legalizing prostitution have failed, the rates of sex-related crimes are lower, and that alone is worth celebrating. Many cities like Amsterdam are famous for their architectural marvels and unique tourist locations. However, attractions like the Red District contain many sinister facts. Our job is to ensure that these problems are acknowledged and acted upon to ensure fairness and justice prospers. We must remain diligent and work within our international community to pressure nations to remain consciously diligent against trafficking and other forms of sexual exploitation.